Arita Morris is a Director of Architects Child Graddon Lewis and Chair of the NLA Expert Panel for Technical Competency. So Arita, can you start just by telling me about CGL and the sort of work the practice does?
Yeah, thank you first of all, Peter and the NLA, for inviting me to have a chat with you this afternoon. So CGL, so we've been around for about almost 30 years. And as many practices, we've evolved from doing extensions in small houses to much bigger projects today. I think that as a practice, we've struggled sometimes to define ourselves, truth be told. But I do think that now we would say that we are definitely mixed use experts. The majority of our work is urban regeneration. It's certainly in the urban environment. That's what we really enjoy doing, and certainly that's what keeps me coming to work. Much of our work is in London, which is obviously the city that our office is based in, but we are branching out a little bit and using, I suppose, the lessons we've learned over the past couple of decades in Manchester, in Leeds, and then further south on the south coast. And it's really interesting to be able to adapt what we know to those other cities, which have very different contexts and demographics, but probably often the same sorts of issues come up, certainly the technical issues. Apart from that, we have a slightly strange then subgroup in our office, and they do a lot of retail work. And I think this is a bit of it's often seen as a poor brother or sister to what architects do. They don't like to talk about retail work in the same vein as they do urban regeneration, but actually it's a really core part of our business. And if we really look at the number of people that interact with different buildings that we work on, retail has got to have the most footfall coming through it. So actually, I think we're quite fortunate to be able to engage with such an interesting environment. So we work for retail landlords, and we also work for retail fit-out companies as well. Obviously, at the moment, the retail world is going through a massive change, and we're part of trying to address that as well. So you might have heard of the renovation of John Lewis into workspace. We're looking at similar types of projects. The other thing that our office does on a regular basis is research projects. So we tend to pick up on sort of topical issues, whether that's how to use redundant retail space in shopping centres, or addressing change of use in offices. And that's definitely a way we look at using what we know and then creating a document which explores that particular topic with other consultants who want to join in. So that's a great platform for us to learn, but also to engage with different sorts of groups of people. The other part of the business also does education. And actually, if you look at the whole package of things, housing, education, commercial fit out, they all tend to come together in our mixed use expertise. So we tend to work in a cross sector way on virtually every project. So I think that in a nutshell, that's probably some of the things we do. Oh, one last thing I wanted to mention, which is a really important part of what we do. We have done for the past 30 years pro bono work for with Crash Shelter, with also London City Missions. Also, we've been working with them for a very long time, and that's also quite an important part of what we do, but also the culture of our office, I think. Yeah.
So tell me a bit about some of your own projects that you've been working on.
I think it's an interesting question because, I've now been working as an architect for nearly 30 years. And it's interesting how the really first projects that I worked on as a Part 1 student, I'm still carrying some of those lessons through today. So if you're talking about key projects, I'd say one of the first ones I worked on was the Yorkshire Sculpture Park at Goodwood when I was working at Studio Downey. And it was a really interesting, project. And as a Part 1, knowing nothing, it was learning everything, and it was a time when everything was drawn and built by fax, basically. But that's a great starting point for any architectural career. And whilst I was there, I worked on a couple of kind of fit out projects in Southall, so nothing too grand, but really good platforms for understanding what architects do, how it's done. And I guess I'm fortunate to have come from the time when architects worked on traditional projects. So bills of quantities and leaders of project teams were very much part of how I learned. Over the course of the years, those scale of projects have gone up. But I would say that, key points in my career that really influenced what I do now is feedback from people who are occupying the building. So I remember going back to one of the fit out jobs for an office I did when I was a Part 2 student, and I walked in to do some snagging, and the secretary was there, the receptionist, and I said, do you have any issues with your desk or something like that? And she said, no, it's all brilliant. And she said, I just want to say that I used to hate this office, but I really enjoy coming into it every day now. And so that's really, if there was any reward for working hard, or all of the stresses and strains of being an architect, I think that would be it. So those early moments, I think, are still quite a big influence for me in the work that we do now. Scale of the work has gone up significantly, but placemaking, communities, user experience are really important to what I do. So I'd say more recently, Victoria Wharf, which is a 20-unit scheme for Westminster Council, completely affordable. We completed that about 3 years ago. We had a really interesting brief for that. For Westminster Council wanted to have an affordable housing building that didn't look like an affordable housing building. So it wanted to try and get away from the stereotype of affordable housing, and we achieved that, and that's the image of it back there. Then another project I'd say is quite important is in South Kilburn, so part of the wider South Kilburn master plan. And it's a large scheme, again, mixed use with a health centre and a creative hub and retail, 50% affordable housing. That was a collaboration with Brent Council and Countryside Properties, who won the bid. And we've got a couple of projects at the moment on site. So they both happen to be in Hackney and for Hackney Council. So working across all stages. So this is, the construction stage is definitely part of my job and what I really enjoy doing as well. What else can I talk about? Oh yes, West End Lane. So West End Lane was a really interesting project which we got planning for a few years ago, and it's probably one of the most controversial, shall we say, projects I worked. There are a lot of objections, but only because it's a very highly motivated local neighbourhood, and this project was slap bang right in the middle of it. So you can imagine the interest of it. So that was a really tough project to get planning on, but I'm glad we did, and I'm glad and I'm really proud of the project, because again, it does all of the things I really enjoy doing, which is affordable housing, mixed use. It's got a new urban space, and if you've been to West End Lane, you know how busy and unrelenting it can be. So it's a bit of relief there. So I think that's probably, I could go on and on.
Great. So you're the chair of the newly created NLA Expert Panel on Competency, as I said. So what do you see as the panel's sort of main priorities?
I think we as a panel started off very much reflecting on the outcome of Grenfell, and particularly the ongoing inquiry and the conversations that were coming out of the inquiry with all of the groups involved. And I think that it's fair to say that the whole industry is going through a big culture change, and has done ever since Grenfell. So the priority for us was to, one, reflect on Grenfell, the here and now, but also to look to the future about, what will happen in 10 years' time. What will the design team of the future look like? So we've split up into a number of subgroups to discuss individual components of what competency could involve. It could be education and training, procurement, sustainability, but the overarching element of the panel's focus is the Building Safety Bill, and connected to that, the Fire Safety Bill, because that encompasses all of those things. It's about how buildings can be built not only safer, but better. And so our focus in terms of competency is what do we need now, but also what does the future design team look like, and how do we get there? So could it be about AI in buildings? How is design for manufacture going to progress in relation to AI? I think that one of the key questions is to do with asking, does the Building Safety Bill do what it's supposed to do? Will it make buildings safer? And if not, what do we think would? And one of the things I'm quite keen on is material science, understanding the science behind materials, which at the moment we don't do enough of. So I'm hoping that out of all of the discussions and subgroup meetings that the panel is having at the moment, we're able to create a series of quite interesting articles or guidance notes, or sort of inform the program anyway of the NLA in a way that is about today, but it's also future focused.
So if there were a few key changes that had happened in the way the construction industry works, what would you like to happen to improve its performance?
I think in a nutshell, it would be that the industry has got to be knowledge, quality, and skill-based, and it just isn't. It is in some parts, but it isn't in others. So we've got to have an industry that is focused on those elements. And what we need to do to expand knowledge and quality is all the things that we're discussing: education, procurement, all the different layers that come with that. And then I also think it's about the point I made earlier, that we need to start including other components like science, material science. We've really got to upskill ourselves on digital capability. But the other element I think that the industry is lacking is a focus on the user. So that is clearly demonstrated in what happened at Grenfell. Residents simply were not considered important. And the ongoing issues around cladding in buildings, highlights that to a really high degree. So whilst the Building Safety Bill has got a component in it that says something about residents' involvement, at the moment it doesn't really detail how that should happen. So for example, if I as a layperson, as a resident of a building, wanted to understand the fire strategy of the building I'm about to occupy, what is there available for me to engage with that or to comment on it? So I think the industry's got to be re-engage with the users, the end users, and not just, who's paying the bills today.
Well, thank you very much for those insights, Arita, because competency is clearly very high on the agenda. As you say, Building Safety Bill is going to have a real impact on the obligations of architects, designers, and the rest of the construction industry to really perform. So thank you very much for the work you're doing on the committee, and thank you for your insights today.
Thank you, Peter. You're welcome.